Hi guys, it's the Rational Leftist, and I'm just doing a quick, unrehearsed, unscripted video, so I do apologise if I mess up my words. Just talking about recent events, things like that. We'll start with the general election, because obviously that did take up quite a bit of my time. As you guys know, the Conservatives won. Well, they didn't really win, but they got the highest minority, if that makes sense. And as a result of that, they've now formed a coalition with the Democratic and Unionist Party from Northern Ireland, which I think is a mistake on their part. Even John Major, the former Conservative Prime Minister, advised against it. I mean, you know, for a Conservative to turn around and sort of hand the reins of power to a socialist leader and a very left-wing party compared to previous Labour governments, that's a pretty bold statement to make and position to take, but John Major did indeed take that position. And I think that's because he knows that having the DUP in power with the Conservatives can really potentially damage the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement that we have with Northern Ireland and Ireland. I'm obviously very happy with Labour's performance. I to be perfectly honest, guys, I knew we weren't going to win a majority. The odds were like 16 to 1. I knew that was like almost not going to happen, but I had a very strong suspicion that there was going to be a coalition. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a coalition government between the Conservatives and another party, or whether it was going to be a progressive alliance between the Lib Dems, SNP and Labour. But anyway, I was right. It was a hung parliament, and Labour did very well. They stole a lot of seats from the Conservatives, and even in Scotland, and it was very good. I mean, we have to sit through God knows how long now of a coalition government between the Conservatives and the DUP, which is definitely not ideal, but whatever. I didn't really expect us to win anyway, so I'm kind of happy with the way things turned out. Theresa May, in her absolute arrogance, wanted to secure an even bigger majority than she had, thinking it was going to be a complete cakewalk, and she was met with one of the hugest socialist wins, if you will, that I've seen this century. A really, really big surgence, especially in young voters who turned out, more than 70% of them turned out to vote, which is unprecedented. Apparently we haven't had that number of people voting since the 1960s, and I think that's because Jeremy Corbyn kind of speaks to the younger people, especially when he, you know, promises to scrap tuition fees and so on. These are things young people can really get behind. These are policies developed with young people in mind, and so the surge in young voters is not too surprising, but it's really awesome. So yeah, I'm fairly happy with the way things turned out, yeah, this whole time though, as this has been going on, Sargon of Akkad, the absolute class cuck from the UK, has just been like talking shit about Corbyn this whole time, and bear in mind, Sargon of Akkad is supposed to be left-wing. He says it himself, and he's taken a a political chart test, PCT I guess, that determined that he was indeed on the left libertarian camp, which is a very big, sort of broad range of political ideologies that encompasses everything from anarcho-communism to left libertarianism, but he was indeed in that camp. And yet somehow Sargon of Akkad has become just... I never really liked the guy, but I despise him now, to be perfectly honest. He's shifted so far to the right, and I kind of saw this happening. He was slowly but surely sort of digging a hole, if you will, into the right wing's camp. That's a totally stupid analogy. I don't know what I'm saying, but you know, slowly but surely he's just gone he's been encompassed by the right, and he's not left wing anymore. He's what I would consider to be a moderate conservative, which is great as far as conservatives go. I mean, as far as conservatives go, he's probably one of the best conservatives next to John Major, in my opinion, because he understands the needs of things like a welfare state and benefits and stuff. He just is not left wing, and that's fine. I mean, Sargon of Akkad is entitled to believe what he wants to believe and follow whatever ideology he wants. I completely disagree with him. I think he's going down a stupid path, and he's kind of like gone down this path on a conspiracy theory. He really genuinely believes that the left are some kind of threat to the West, which is just nonsense. I mean, he doesn't know anything about socialism. It's kind of maddening because he believes in this cultural Marxist just nonsense. And any left winger, any Marxist, any socialist, anybody on the left or anybody to the left of Sargon can sort of turn around and say, mate, this is bullshit. It's not real. There's no such thing as cultural Marxism. And even if you got rid of the cultural Marxism thing, even if you proved to Sargon that cultural Marxism ain't a thing, he would still think that there was some alternate plot by the left to literally destroy Western civilization, which just sort of shows how unhinged he is. And he really is unhinged because he's someone that has kind of not matured with age, but kind of immatured with age. I mean, if you look at his earlier stuff, he seemed to be a lot more calm, rational, if you will, part of the whole rational skeptic community, and he's just gone off the deep end now. His views and his political ideology has sort of become more and more right-wing the more he associates with right-wingers and sort of believes in the nonsense perpetuated by the right about the left. And yeah, so Sargon has been talking absolute garbage about Corbyn, and Sargon has this weird way of looking at the world, and he's in one way he's dishonest. Like, he knows he's not telling the truth. Like, I genuinely think that there is a slight air of what would you call it? Like, he knows that he's chatting shit, I think, sometimes, but he just does it anyway because he wants to paint a narrative that he believes in, and so he's happy to bend the truth to sort of perpetuate that narrative, if you know what I mean, even though it's clearly false nonsense. And my good friend, the Rational Left, my namesake, he's made a lot of videos sort of addressed at Sargon, and this kind of leads me into the next part of this video. I really like the Rational Left's videos about Sargon because the Rational Left completely calls out Sargon and his absolute drivel. Complete right-wing hysteria, nonsense, conspiracy theorist, just bullshit that Sargon just pumps out. Total trash can ideology. But I just don't have the willpower to do that. And honestly, I'm kind of tired of it. Now, I've obviously, a part of this is obviously inevitable. For those of you who watch my channel, you'll understand that I'm somewhat exhausted at this point. I mean, I've spent the last month or so just really advocating for Labour, campaigning for Labour, and so on. And it's really kind of sucked it out of me, especially when when I've had to sort of deal with lots of Tory voters or people who just don't like Corbyn for no real good reason. It just really takes it out of me. And even though the left have made sort of good gains in the UK and probably around the world, I still feel like we're talking to a brick wall a lot of the time. For example, in the lead up to the election, I was talking to a lot of people saying who you're going to vote for, blah, blah, blah. And so many of them were like, oh, I can't vote for Labour. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, I've always voted Labour, but I can't vote for Labour under Corbyn. And then you know that they're forming that opinion of Corbyn on the right-wing media that we have in the UK. And make no mistake about it, we have the most right-wing media in the UK. Like, it's freaking insane. Now, this chart that you can see is an opinion poll. Like, that is to say that YouGov asked its users whether they thought their media was too left-wing or too right-wing. Although there is some backing to this. If you just Google media bias in the UK and stuff like that, you can find out the actual, like, the reason why this sort of poll even came out. The press in the United Kingdom is extremely right-wing leaning. Rupert Murdoch owns two of the most popular newspapers, which would be The Sun and the Daily Mail. Apart from him, of course, there's also the Daily Express, the Telegraph, maybe to a lesser extent those two. And so most of the papers that we have are generally right-wing leaning. And it's quite funny because if you look at this chart here, Sweden's media is like immensely left-wing, almost too left-wing in a way. Like, it's not balanced. Denmark is doing pretty well, right? They're somewhat balanced. Britain, though, if you look at Britain compared to all of the other countries in this thing, we are right-wing. The media, is generally right-wing on most topics: economics, housing, health, crime and immigration. And the problem with this is that it forms public opinion. That people say the UK is a more conservative country. This is true. But the reason we're a more conservative country is because we're made that way. Sweden, on the other hand, is a very left-wing country, almost too left-wing. I have a conservative friend from Sweden who's really upset about it because he can't even sort of criticise immigration, for example, without people labelling him as a racist, which is totally unfair. He should be able to criticise, immigration without being called a racist. I'd have no problem doing that in the UK. I could be like, oh, immigration is not great, blah, 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 and people wouldn't bat an eyelid. But in Sweden, because the public opinion is formed by their media, which is largely left-wing, people are more likely to be hostile against opinions that are more right-wing or perhaps centrist. But then you've got Britain, which is like the complete opposite of Sweden. We're totally right-wing when it comes to our media. So when I deal with people who say, oh, I don't like Corbyn, I'm like, well, why don't you like Corbyn? Is it because you, as an individual, have done your research on the guy and you've decided you don't agree with his policies and what he's done in the past? Or are you forming your opinion based on what you've read or seen in the media? Because I'm going to argue that it's probably the latter. And I always tell people, don't vote for personality. It doesn't matter. Vote for policies. But unfortunately, not everybody sees it that way. There was even a presenter who, when Corbyn said to the presenter, he said, look, why do you keep asking me about me? Ask me about my policy. Ask me about what we plan to do as a party. And the TV show, the presenter interrupted Corbyn and said, because policy doesn't matter. That's not a troll. That's 100% true. Look it up. She said policy doesn't matter. But policy is the only thing that should matter. And this is something that I campaigned tirelessly when I was at work, when I was online. I was continuously telling people, look, I agree Corbyn is not a perfect fucking guy, but he's pretty good. If you look at his track record of what he's done, what he's voted on, who he stands up for, he's our guy. You should be behind him, support the guy. He's not as bad as people make him out to be. And if it wasn't for people, like, people always like to complain about Corbyn's links with the IRA and stuff. Well, if it wasn't for people like Corbyn and the Blair Labour government, right, there would never have been a peace process. There would never have been a Good Friday Agreement. Think about that for a second. The Good Friday Agreement would never have happened. And it was because of people like Corbyn, like Blair, the Labour Party, that we even have a peace process at all. And now the irony of it, the fact that the Conservatives and all of the Conservative supporters, including, may I add, Sargon of Akkad, who, you know, claims he doesn't like the Tories, and he probably doesn't, but he does support them. I mean, even in his video leading up to the election, he said, despite Labour's good intentions, I can't possibly vote for them, that's why I'm going to support the Conservatives. I mean, he didn't word it exactly like that, but you can check it out on his channel. The Conservative Party have now formed a coalition with the DUP, who are literally linked to terrorism, just like the IRA were. You know, they're just the other side of the Northern Irish terrorist coin, if you will. It's amazing, you know, the way things have come, the way things have become. It's insane. And Corbyn is viciously attacked by the right-wing media that we have in the UK, that unfortunately misinforms people. It gets people to have this warped idea of what Corbyn is like, because when people open a newspaper, they're not expecting to read a political opinion necessarily. Well, some sort of know that they are, but generally when people open a newspaper, they expect to read the news. Okay? They don't expect the entire paper to be one giant opinion piece, which is basically what it is. I mean, you look at the Greenfield Tower fire that just happened the other day. You know, every newspaper that wasn't right-wing, or at least wasn't owned by, like, Rupert Murdoch, was listing all of the ways and who is to blame for this inferno that took place. Okay? And yet the Sun and the Daily Mail, the two most read newspapers in this country, both right-wing, both owned by Rupert Murdoch, basically destroyed a guy's life who lived in that tower, saying that his faulty fridge burnt the building down. That was the reason that the building burnt down. Look, this fucking black guy did it. His shitty refrigerator that he didn't fix burnt the whole building down. We all know that's not the case. And we know that the whole building was covered in flammable materials, and that the pipes were outdated, the freaking elevator was a hazard, everything about the building was messed up. It was absolutely a shithole, and the landlord didn't invest into fixing it. And yet, despite all this, Corbyn's then turned around and been like, oh, there are some properties in the area that are empty and unoccupied. Perhaps we can use those temporarily to house the victims of this inferno until they're able to get back on their feet. And the media, like the Sun, the Mail, interpreted this as saying that Corbyn wanted to seize properties that belonged to the rich to give to the poor, like he was some fucking kind of communist. They just totally took it out of context. And yet, Sargon of Akkad rolled with that. So, Sargon of Akkad is like, it's like he's getting his opinions from these newspapers. He lacks any kind of cognitive, independent thought. And unfortunately, he's just one of many people in this country. And that brings me to the last part of this video. Why have I ranted about all this? Why have I talked about this, complained about this? Well, I'm just kind of fucking tired of it. I need a break. My heart's not in it right now. Yeah, I sat here and ranted for 20 minutes about politics, but that's me. I don't really plan on making any videos anytime soon. I've got no intention of making one. I don't want to make one, and I just can't be bothered, because I feel like it's just a never-ending battle, and no matter how much I do, no matter how much I say, it's never really gonna 100% change things for the better. I'm just a small voice, not many people listen to me, and I just don't care anymore. At least I don't care as much. So go watch The Rational Left, because he's more likely to give you better content. Peace. This is The Rational Leftist signing out.